this is where I think procurement can raise its profile in organization and credibility, because they need to understand these concepts in terms of cash flow. Without a PO, you cannot do the receipting. And without the receipting, you cannot raise accruals before the invoice comes in. So how can you manage a cash flow of a business if you don't know how much money is going out?
Thank you so much for joining another edition of the never-ending climb for a stronger supply chain and procurement for companies running SAP. Today, I have the pleasure of being joined by Frank Omare. And Frank is a long-time procurement and supply chain professional with experience in manufacturing and all sorts of consumer products. And he's been through, seen it and done it in the line jobs, in the consulting jobs, and now from a technology perspective, where he's helping companies run their supply chain better from the Global Center of Excellence, the program office supporting some of SAP's customers with the toughest problems. So, Frank, thank you again so much for joining me from London, England today.
Sean, it's my pleasure from a very cold London as we speak.
All right, well, home in Calgary, sometimes we get great skiing around here. That's the way I look at it. But it does need a little bit of coolness to keep the snow on the ski hill. So, Frank, when we were talking about one of the tricky conversations that some leaders are having right now, the board of directors is saying, what are you doing about your carbon footprint? And this lands at the chief procurement officer or head of procurement, head of supply chain's desk. And they say, uh-oh.
Yeah, indeed they do. And if I can relate that to my experiences many, many years ago where we didn't have technology, we didn't have the data, it was a very, very difficult and different scenario then. Now we do have technology which can enable some of these complex and difficult processes, particularly around aggregation and reliability of data and having that visibility across your supply chain. Yes, procurement certainly has a role to play in this, and it's an exciting one.
Sure
it's procurement that does the sourcing. It's procurement that awards contract to suppliers. It's procurement that does the evaluation of suppliers, either for efficiency, cost, sustainability. It's all within the gift of procurement to make those decisions on behalf of the organization. And it's procurement that monitors the performance of the suppliers as well. And it's also within the gift of procurement to decide what that supply base is going to look like. Are we going to have big suppliers, medium suppliers, small, medium-sized businesses? Are we going to have social enterprises, minority-owned businesses? These are all exciting initiatives which procurement can blend into the supply chain so that it's efficient. You're trying to save money. And at the same time, you're being ethical and you're aligning yourself with the corporate goals of the organization with respect to sustainability.
It's so important. There's so many levers that procurement and supply chain leaders can pull to, number one, have a great answer when the board asks. And number two, have the data to back it up. And number three, have that plan where the communication of, look, the company, the board has set this kind of a net something goal by this date. Here's the plan to get there. Here's how we're doing at 100%. So many of those levers, so many of the buttons, so many of the dials to go make that happen, to unlock it, are right there in that procurement supply chain team. When we've been talking, we've both run into this. Procurement and IT share a similar but slightly different adoption or activation problem with the value that they're bringing to the rest of the business. IT will often talk about how, well, we rolled out the system that people asked for, but nobody's using it. And procurement will often talk about, we negotiated all of these rebates and preferred supplier agreements, but people are still going rogue and going maverick. And I find that similarity to be such a beautiful opportunity to look at this and go, everyone's special and unique and different, and everybody's just like everybody else. So in those similarities, what can you suggest for organizations to learn from their IT and procurement teams around what good looks like to unlock that adoption, whether it's savings or the new tool that's being rolled out?
Yeah. Well, my background is engineering, and we try to keep things simple. So I would say collaboration.
Important.
So when you're going to market for a new solution or some technology, procurement and IT need to work hand in hand. So when you are looking at various solutions, you need to look at it from a perspective of a user perspective. So how is this going to raise productivity of the procurement team, increase visibility, reduce maverick spend, drive compliance, integrate exciting initiatives like sustainability? So what does that solution look like, or at least what are our requirements for when we go out to market? As I said, collaboration with IT, because IT need to understand this. They don't need to be experts in procurement, but they need to understand what are the goals of procurement, what is it they're trying to achieve, what are the requirements, and then start thinking about, okay, what does good look like from a technology perspective? Quick to deploy, it's easy to upgrade, it's a cloud solution, it's future-proof, it can be easily deployed or implemented in-house, or we have partners we work with who can do this for us. And we can work together with, procurement and IT, work together to develop an adoption plan. So in other words, how does it, from start to finish, working with our service provider, how long does it take? What are the key milestones? What are the risks? Where are the review points? How do we communicate this internally? How do we ensure that we are implementing the solution and it is in line with the business case? And that's really important. Business case, it can be as detailed as you want in terms of spreadsheets, net present value, payback, etc., or it could be very simply, this is what we want to get out of the solution. This is why we are purchasing this solution. And we will know what good looks like because we'll be realizing these benefits. So everybody needs to come together, procurement and IT, and they need to work both sides, both in terms of going to the market, selecting a supplier, and also in terms of implementation and consumption of the solution itself. There is nothing worse than spending a lot of money and not adopting the solution. Or even worse, you spend a lot of time implementing it and nobody's using it. And because there's a problem with the user experience or the solution doesn't do what it's supposed to. But most importantly, you need to have a business case. So you can tick to the board, get it signed off. These are the benefits. And when you go into implementation and consumption, you're realizing the business case. Those things need to happen. IT and procurement need to work together. Nobody can do this in isolation.
What I keep seeing in what good looks like that I would add to that is taking bite-sized pieces that people can actually digest. And I've often seen, whether it's in small business or large, it's not necessarily starvation that people suffer from, but more often indigestion and trying to bite off too much at once or trying to swallow too much at once. And, it's very difficult for things to go smoothly when the right engagement, adoption, and appetite is not gauged. And I would add that when somebody is looking to select and roll out, the customers of procurement and IT are often left out of the business case. And to the extent that they can be included in it, for the purpose of procurement and supply chain is to keep the factory running and to make sure that things get delivered on time and to make sure that people, when they're buying things, are aware of who those preferred suppliers are. But it's darn near impossible to be aware of that if the preferred supplier for catering is buried in a SharePoint site somewhere that nobody is really looking at. So that what computers can do is so much more than what I think people give it credit for. And the oh my God, computers can do that moment of when you are looking for something and it says, hey, we already have a preferred supplier for that. Would you like to skip the RFP process? Or would you like to skip getting 3 bids for that? Oh my goodness, that is a delighted customer. And if that was an admin assistant who now doesn't need to spend the next 2 days going and collecting everything to make sure that they feel like they're following the right policy, the savings are tremendous they're often a little trickier to measure. But when you want the adoption, it's some of those people too that really need to be brought in. And I love the way that business case, in many cases, is recognizing the softer benefits to other parts of the organization to create that frictionless interaction.
Absolutely.
When you think about, I've got white hair, but you've been in your professional career longer than one might imagine. You've aged very gracefully. And with that comes a lot of experience. When you imagine what you wish you could tell yourself 10 years ago about what good looks like and about what some of the things that have gone well and maybe you've learned the hard way, what would you want to tell yourself 10 years ago to help all of those folks that are earlier in their career than we are?
I think, first of all, I would say you need to have a very clear strategy in terms of what is it that you want procurement to do for the organization, how you geared up, and how are you resourced, and what skills and capabilities do you have. You need to be very clear around who are your preferred suppliers and why are they your preferred suppliers, and who's going to access those preferred suppliers. Is it your own procurement team, or are you going to have a self-service tool that you can roll out to business users so they can access those suppliers? So you need to be very clear around the operating model, as I would call it, for procurement. So 10 years ago, that's what I would have said to myself or to my peers. Keep it very simple, have the logic, have a really good understanding of who your preferred suppliers are and how are you communicating that, either through email or through any other means that were available at that time. So let's get everybody brought into that process, work with your stakeholders is what I would say. I would also say to myself 10 years ago and to my peers, you need to have very clear processes. You need to be very clear who your preferred suppliers are and how can people access those suppliers. And if it's something basic, like people have to email you to say, these are my requirements, then at least you have a process of sorts. Then I would say, you know what, we're doing all the right things, but not necessarily in the right way. One day, there will be some technology that will come in and enable all these processes that will speed them up and make them more efficient. We are doing the right things, but we're probably not doing them in the right way. This is where technology comes in. And I would even say that to myself or to my peers today. Technology is not the answer to your problems. What it does is it enhances what you've got. It speeds things up. It brings capabilities. It brings visibility. It enables you to process complex reams of data and have answers in real time so you can have these insights. But if you've got processes which are terrible, you don't know who your preferred suppliers are, you haven't negotiated your contract, technology is not going to help you. It's an enabler.
Yeah. And in some cases, it could automate some really terrible processes. I still shudder to think about an organization that reached out to me several years ago saying, Sean, we'd like your help because we've got all of these people in the business that are asking for the PO after they've already received the invoice. So we need to make it easier to make the PO after we've got the invoice. You know those moments where you just kind of want to not make eye contact and back away slowly and just like, nope, that's not, no, just no, that's wrong in every sense. And, I'm not going to be part of automating that. And that kind of request is out there.
Absolutely.
But I imagine it comes from a place of wanting to make things better, but not necessarily having the buy-in that there is a better way. And I think sometimes that's where asking for help and helping collaborate to create an opportunity for people to see what good looks like. And it usually comes from an experience where somebody had to try and go get a PO before they bought something years ago, and it was so painful for them that they think it's completely unreasonable or impossible. But at the end of the day, that might no longer be true.
Exactly. And I've actually lived some of those scenarios. In fact, we used to call it the procurement manager's kryptonite, an invoice arriving with no PO number on it. And that created problems for a whole host of things. For a start, where was the authorization process? Who signed it off? whose levels of authority did it match, etc., etc. So into the delegations of authority, did we follow that? Which is, and then that is a compliance issue for our finance teams, and into the corporate stewardship, that is a major problem. And by the way, if you want to defraud a company, what best way of doing that? By buying goods and services without PO, without authorization. So there's a risk situation there as well. Also, from a finance perspective, and this is where I think procurement can raise its profile in organization and credibility, because they need to understand these concepts into the cash flow. Without a PO, you cannot do the receipting. And without the receipting, you cannot raise accruals before the invoice comes in. So how can you manage a cash flow of a business if you don't know how much money is going out?
And fundamentally, it means that your financial reporting is out of whack. And in many organizations, it's actually material.
And, having been through the pain of month end and year end, working in procurement, working with finance, I can assure you, you do not want POs. You do not want to have invoices without POs. And you want to make sure you send out clean POs. In other words, we are very clear about our requirements, and we're going to send them to supplier. The supplier will acknowledge the receipt of those POs, and we will get our goods or services within the lead times which are in the contract. What we do not want is POs just going out, and then they phone the supplier, that PO, it needs to be amended. Don't worry about that. Just deliver the goods. We'll sort that out later. And we all know what happens later on.
Yeah. Sounds like a recipe for something getting very messy.
Now we have technology where POs can be raised electronically with the correct delegations of authority, blah, 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 blah. It's sent to supply electronically. They acknowledge receipt. If you want to do a change request, it's very simple, and everything is in line. The goods are received. You do your receipting. You generate the accrual before the invoice comes in. Very clean process. Oh, and by the way, the invoices are now electronic. And some organizations actually have PO flip, where the PO flips into the invoice. If that isn't, so it's a very clean process.
I love that.
And think about all the time that is taken out between procurement and accounts payable, trying to reconcile invoices, trying to spend days working out what has happened. Meanwhile, the supplier's payment terms being
poke my eye out with my mouse is what I would want to do.
Meanwhile, the supplier's payment terms have just been blown apart.
Yep. And hopefully there's no interest that's due. Frank, this has been one of the most wonderful conversations. And I know that people watching, some people will feel some of these a little too close to home. But we know that by sharing these kinds of ideas, this can help more people out there really genuinely improve their procurement and supply chain. So I want to thank you for joining us today and for sharing what was on your heart, your experience, and your wisdom. And for everybody that's watching today, thank you again, and we'll see you next week. This has been another edition of The Never Ending Climb for a Stronger Procurement and Supply Chain for Companies Running SAP. Thanks, everyone.
It's been my pleasure.